Good afternoon. It's the start of a new week, our third since the official lockdown began. So this is episode 11. Thanks for joining us. Don't know about you, but I didn't get to see Her Majesty the Queen this weekend. I was manning the barbecue in the back garden, which is, what all us masculine types do. But I'm hoping you'll find today's show equally rousing and inspiring. Now, I don't know about you, but 3 weeks ago, I don't think I'd even heard the expression furlough before. Here we are 21 days later, and it's something that I say a lot. It's a phrase that's become among the most searched on demolitionnews.com. Now, I'm not an employment expert, nor am I a legal expert, but thankfully we have with us today someone who is both of those things. Ben Power is an employment law expert for springhouselaw.com. Springhouse is a firm of specialist employment law solicitors with a network of offices, including virtual ones, with a growing video and telephone practice. The company helps employers and employees with settlement agreements and any other workplace issues they might have. And I've got a funny feeling some of those issues might include the furloughing of staff. So, Ben, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem at all. Now, I guess the starting point is, what is the job retention scheme? Where does all of this stem from?
So the job retention scheme is from the point of view of employees. Okay, so there's two parallel streams here. One is for people who are self-employed, one is for employees and people who employ them. So talking about the employees and the people who employed them, basically it's a safety net which gives people who otherwise would have been laid off or made redundant access to 80% of their salary, or up to £2,500 a month, whichever's higher. So if your salary was 30 plus, anything lower than that, you're going to be doing quite well out of this. If you're highly paid, obviously you're not going to be doing so well, but at least you get to keep your job.
No, absolutely. So in the grand scheme of things then, what does the term furlough actually mean?
So furlough is a brand new term to us in the UK. They know it well in America, however. And furlough is where you're laid off temporarily from work. So we would call it layoff. They call it furlough. And in fact, in the government guidance, they refer to it as being laid off as well. But really, from our point of view, I think it would be a situation where someone would have been made redundant otherwise. I don't know that much about how your individual members' contracts work or readers' contracts work, but layoff used to be something you'd find in an employment contract. You don't find it so much now. So what we're talking about, generally speaking, is that redundancy scenario.
Okay, now under the scheme, you just mentioned employers can claim up to 80% of their employees' wages. Are those employers obliged to make up the remaining 20%, or doesn't it work that way?
No, it doesn't work that way. The way you would go about it, if you were wanting to do it as an employer, and by the way, it's completely voluntary, is you would come to an agreement with your member of staff, your employee, for them to be paid whatever you want them to be paid. You could be suggesting that they get the 80% without any top up, or you could volunteer the top up, but it's not compulsory. Government guidance says that they'd like the top up to be made, but there's absolutely no obligation for you to pay any more than that 80% that you'd get back from the government.
Now, one of the things that I've seen quite a few examples of people writing into us and calling into us is the fact that a lot of people have been actually made redundant, so they are effectively unemployed as of now, which, given that the fact that the government was going to pick up the tab for their wages, seems like a very strange thing for an employer to do, particularly when there is every possibility that work will pick up soon afterwards.
It is a strange thing, and we're seeing a lot of it. And the scenario we're seeing a lot of seems to be that the employer decides, well, I'm going to call this a redundancy, and it's going to be permanent, come what may, whether the business picks up or not. I'm going to call this a redundancy, and I'm going to use furlough to pay the notice.
Right. Okay.
So that's something, strictly speaking, there's nothing in the guidance at the moment that prohibits that. But I think that's kind of pushing it, I think, to the limit, really, is when you've already made your mind up that it's going to be a redundancy. Don't forget, this all applies only after the 28th of February. So the employee needs to have been with you before the 28th of February, and you need to have a PAYE scheme up and running by that date as well.
Right. Okay. Now, you mentioned early on the fact that this applies to employed people. Obviously, there are, within the demolition and construction industry, there are a lot of people that are agency staff or they're self-employed and self-funded. I've been reading some fairly horrific stories about the fact that they're entitled to not a great deal. Can you explain what that situation is?
Agency, that's going to very much depend on the particularities of that agency and who your employer is in that agency. Unfortunately, sometimes an agency arrangement can leave that individual without an employer at all. I think that's probably the problem that you're looking at the moment there. But if there is a clear employee of that agency worker, then furlough should be furlough should be applicable to them.
Right.
The people who the other sort of groups of people that you might be interested in are the people who of workers, and they're not strictly employees. So, for instance, they might not have the rights to holidays, etc. But really, the yardstick we're looking at here with the government is whether they're PAYE. So, whether they're a worker, whether they're an employee, whether they're employed by an agency, as long as they're PAYE, then they'll be covered.
Okay. And if they're not covered, what is the alternative?
Well, the alternative, unfortunately, you've got the potential that because they're not employed or workers of the companies that we're talking about, they might be self-employed. If they're self-employed, there's another scheme that they could maybe reach into, provided that they've been making tax returns. So the other option would be that they fall between all the cracks and they're going to be looking for some sort of universal credit. But certainly if they're self-employed, then there's a parallel scheme working for them.
So, given the complexities of all this, is there a sensible place that people can go to find out more?
Well, they can obviously visit our website, springhouselaw.com. We've got some information there. The government guidance isn't actually that bad. I quite like the government website. It's very clear. But looking at it here, there's about 10 pages of guidance on it for employers. And it does cover most things. There's some tricky areas that aren't covered. So, for instance, what happens with holiday during furlough, and what happens in those scenarios where you're wanting to pay notice out during furlough. That's not actually specifically dealt with. But it's pretty good guidance there, government website.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I'll add a link to our show notes for that, and I'll also add a link to Springhouse Law as well. Ben, for the time being, thanks ever so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your input and your insight.
Pleasure. Thanks so much.
All the best. So I hope you all found that useful. I think we actually just hit a bit of a high on number of people watching live, which is a nice thing to see. We have just had a question in. Now I'm going to see if I can get Ben back. We just had a comment in, Ben, from Andrew Dickey. When will the UK government pay this money? Assuming you can still hear me. Any idea on that?
Yeah, I'm here still. So if they get their act together, there's supposed to be a mechanism for being able to claim the money online by the end of this month. Can't see it happening myself. And that's all they've committed to, is to have some sort of mechanism for paying that money, for claiming that money by the end of the month. Now, as an employer, you're going to be footing that bill while the government gets its act together, unfortunately, which can be a downside of the furlough option.
Yeah, and my guess is, as I say, I actually think the government have handled themselves remarkably well, given that this is an unprecedented situation we find ourselves in. But the sheer volume of people that are going to be claiming this, I think, it's not going to be a quick process, is it?
No, and I can't see this. I can't see even the portal being up and ready by the end of the month. But we'll see.
Fingers crossed. This time, Ben, I'm really going to let you go because there's no more comments to deal with. Thanks so much, ever so much for your input.
Thank you. Thanks.
So thanks for that, Andrew. I hope that answers your question. It doesn't really help, I guess, at this point in time, but hopefully it will going forward. Now, one of the things that I wanted to bring to your attention, I did actually have this noted down here somewhere, but the system seems to have gone completely berserk. So one of the things that I'm concerned about is the fact that we have a situation now where a lot of us spend a lot of our time on site. Now, I know there's this idea that men don't talk to each other and that kind of thing. There is a degree of truth to that, and we're all aware of the mental health implications of not talking to each other and that kind of thing. But even setting that aside, I think one of the things that I miss, and my guess is that a lot of people that watch this miss, is just the day-to-day banter, the chit-chat and the gossip that takes place on site. Now, we can't replicate that. We can't replicate the whiff of diesel in the air. We can't strew around the place discarded copies of yesterday's newspapers, or leave unwashed mugs of tea laying around the place. So we can't recreate the environment. But thanks to some fairly nifty technology, we can certainly attempt to recreate some of that banter. So that's what we're going to do. I'll be absolutely honest now. I stole this idea 100% from Lawrence Waterman of the British Safety Council, who was our guest on the previous episode. Basically, Lawrence and his team meet once a week. Funnily enough, I was just talking to Ben Power, and he was saying exactly the same. They meet together once a week on Zoom, and we are planning to do the same. We are going to term it the Demolition Social Club. Not surprisingly, it's a social club and it's about demolition. And we will be launching at 7 o'clock on Wednesday this week, 7 o'clock in the evening. So if you've got a PC with a webcam and a microphone, if you've got a tablet computer or a smartphone, you can join the social club and the chit chat and the gossip and the banter 100% free of charge. There's nothing to download, nothing particularly difficult about it. There will be no agenda, no guest speakers, no restrictions on your beverage of choice. So if you want to sit there with a can of beer in your hand, good luck to you. I won't, because I don't, but if that's what you're going to do, then you crack on. So if you're that way inclined, you can pour yourself a cold one and treat the Demolition Social Club effectively like your local pub. But it's a local pub that only admits people that are into the demolition industry. As I said, there's no set agenda, although my guess is COVID-19 will probably be the main topic of conversation. So if you want to talk about where you're working, why you're not working, if you just want to have a bit of a rant about the mixed messages you're getting from government or from the HSE or from the industry trade bodies, feel free, join us at 7 o'clock on Wednesday evening. If you're watching this live, details are elsewhere on the Facebook, the Demolition News Facebook page. Failing that, have a look on demolitionnews.com. There's full details of where to join and how to join and all that goes with it. So if you can spare 30 minutes, that's all we're going to go for, because I'm not entirely sure anyone's actually going to turn up. But we're planning to go live for 30 minutes at 7 o'clock on Wednesday. If nobody turns up, our first broadcast will be our last. If it proves popular, we'll probably do a longer version at some point in the future. In an ideal world, I'd quite like to make it monthly, because I think that seems like a sensible way to go, but you can find out more at demolitionnews.com. Just one other quick one that I'd like to draw your attention to over on demolitionnews.com as well is there's a news story there about the fact that the health and safety executive have effectively said that they are reserving the right to continue to close sites if they find sites are breaching coronavirus guidance. I'm well aware that there's a lot of companies that haven't stopped work. There's also a lot that stopped work and have gone back to work. But there is very clear guidance, well, fairly clear guidance now on exactly what sites should and shouldn't do. But it now appears that the HSE is going to be policing that. So if you've got any concern about that, as I say, have a look at demolitionnews.com. There'll be a link through to the HSE website, which is the full story of what is required. There's also links there to the actual guidance itself, so you know that you can keep your sites well within the restricted, within the guidelines laid out by the HSE. I think that will probably do us for today. Yeah, we're coming up to 15 minutes. So usual ending. Stay safe, look after each other, look after your families and your friends and your colleagues, and we will see you again at 3 o'clock on Tuesday. And thanks once again to Ben Power for joining us. Great insight. If you need this information further down the line, it will be posted. It will appear on Facebook as well, but it'll be on Demolition News. It'll be on our YouTube channel, on our Instagram TV, and probably a number of other places as well as that. So thanks for your time. Thanks for watching. Thanks for coming out in your droves today. It's our highest number of live views yet. This is apparently proving popular, which I find astounding. But thanks a lot for watching. Stay safe and see you tomorrow.